You think the problem is discipline. You think that if you could just wake up a little earlier, push a little harder, stay focused a little longer, things would finally start to click. You were taught to believe that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is a gap of effort. That the people who seem at peace, who seem fulfilled, who seem like they have it together, simply tried harder than you. That they figured out some system, some habit, some trick of willpower that you have not yet managed to master. You believe this, not just intellectually, you feel it. In that quiet moment before you fall asleep, when you review the day and something whispers that you should have done more. In that afternoon slump when motivation disappears and you convince yourself you are lazy. In the distance between who you imagined you would become and who you actually are today. That belief feels like common sense. It feels like responsibility. It feels like the reasonable adult thing to hold on to. But here is what nobody told you. That belief is exactly what is draining you. Not because effort is worthless, not because discipline does not matter, but because you have been applying those tools to the wrong problem entirely. And when you apply the right tools to the wrong problem, you do not solve anything. You just exhaust yourself. You wear down. You start to feel like there is something fundamentally broken inside of you, when in reality, you have simply been misreading the situation from the very beginning. This is what Abraham Maslow spent decades trying to explain, and almost nobody actually listened. Before we go deeper, if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, take a moment to do that now, and leave your like on this content. What you are about to hear is not the kind of thing you find everywhere. It is the kind of reflection that takes a long time to put together, and your support is what makes it possible to keep bringing this type of thinking to more people. So subscribe and leave your like. It genuinely helps. Now, let us begin at the real beginning. You were handed a model, not consciously. Nobody sat you down and said, here is the official manual for how human beings work. But it arrived anyway, piece by piece, through everything you were told, everything you watched, everything that was praised, and everything that was punished from the time you were old enough to understand words. The model said something like this. You have goals, you feel resistance, you push through the resistance, you achieve the goal, you feel fulfilled, and then you set a new goal. This is life. This is progress. This is what it means to be a functional, responsible, successful adult human being. The model even had a name for when things went wrong, when you did not push through, when the resistance won, when the goal was not reached. The model called that failure. And failure, in the vocabulary of this model, was a reflection of your character, your weakness, your lack of seriousness about your own life. You absorbed this. Every motivational speech you ever heard reinforced it. Every story about someone who overcame impossible odds and made it to the top confirmed it. Every time someone in your life looked disappointed in your results, the message was sealed in deeper. The problem is you. The solution is to try harder. The gap is made of insufficient effort, and because this model is everywhere, because it is embedded in schools and workplaces and families, and the content you consume daily, it is nearly impossible to question. To question it feels like making excuses. It feels like giving up. It feels like the kind of thinking that lazy people do to justify not trying. So you keep going. You push harder. You read another book about habits. You download another productivity app. You set your alarm earlier. You write your goals on paper. You visualize. You hustle. You grind. And you are still tired, still hollow, still vaguely lost in a way you cannot quite name or explain. This is not a coincidence. This is the model working exactly as it was designed to work. And here is what Maslow saw that almost everyone else missed. Observe your own history for a moment, not the highlights, not the resume version, the actual texture of your daily experience over the last few years. Think about the last time you felt genuinely motivated. Not the surface-level push you manufacture when you need to get something done. The real thing. The kind of energy that does not require convincing yourself. The kind where you wake up and there is something alive in you that wants to move forward. When was that? Now think about the last time you felt genuinely at peace. Not sedated, not just tired enough to stop worrying. Actually settled. Like the ground beneath you was solid and you did not need to keep checking that it was still there. When was that? For most adults in the modern world, both of those experiences are rare, and when they do appear, they feel fragile. Like you found solid footing for a moment, but knew you could lose it at any second, so you hold on tight. And the holding on tight is exhausting in its own way. Repair no memento in which the tiredness is not about the amount of work you are doing. Notice the exhaustion that is present, even on days when nothing particularly hard happens, the kind that is not cured by sleep, the kind that sits somewhere behind your eyes and underneath your chest. That specific tiredness. Do you know what that is? That is not physical tiredness. It is not even mental tiredness from overwork. It is the tiredness of a person who has been trying to build at the top while the foundation underneath keeps shifting, and you cannot see the foundation because nobody ever pointed at it. So you keep stacking things higher, trying to reach the place where you will finally feel okay, and wondering why the structure keeps wobbling. Maslow saw this. He described it in language that most people who quote him have never actually read. He spent his career watching people, not just sick people, not just patients in a clinical setting. He was famously interested in the healthiest human beings he could find. He studied people who seemed to be operating at their full capacity, people who seemed genuinely whole. And he asked a question that sounds simple, but cuts very deep. What does a person actually need in order to become who they are capable of becoming? The answer he arrived at was not what the motivational industry wants you to hear. Here is the inversion, the reversal, the thing that will either feel like relief or like a threat to everything you have been holding on to. You have been told that your problem is motivation, that you do not want things enough, that if you wanted success badly enough, or peace, or fulfillment, or connection, or purpose, you would have it by now, that the obstacle is desire, that somewhere inside you there is a dimmer switch that turns up or down the intensity of your wanting, and the people who have what you want simply turned theirs higher. This is wrong, not partially wrong, completely wrong, structurally wrong. Wrong in the way that actually explains why everything you have tried has not worked the way it was supposed to. It is not a lack of motivation that is blocking your life. It is that you are trying to live at the wrong level of need, while the levels beneath it have not been properly established. Let that settle for a moment, because this is the entire mechanism. This single structural reality explains more about your daily experience than 10 years of motivational content ever could. When a level of need is unstable or unmet or shaky, the human nervous system does not allow genuine movement toward higher levels. It cannot. This is not a choice. This is not a character flaw. This is biology and psychology operating exactly as they were built to operate. The system was designed to anchor you to whatever level needs attention, because survival comes first. Security comes first. The body and the mind will not let you genuinely pursue meaning or growth or self-expression while something more fundamental is screaming for attention underneath. So you feel stuck, and you interpret being stuck as laziness, as weakness, as proof that the model was right and you are just not trying hard enough, and then you try harder, and the trying harder costs energy. And that energy was the energy the system needed to address what was actually wrong. So now you are more depleted, and more stuck, and more convinced that you are the problem. This is not motivation failure. This is misdiagnosis. And a misdiagnosed condition treated with the wrong medicine does not get better. It gets worse more slowly in ways that are harder to trace. Maslow mapped this. He did not invent it. He described something that was always true about human beings. He looked at enough people, over enough time, to see the pattern clearly enough to name it. He saw that human needs are not random. They are not a flat list of equally urgent demands competing with each other. They are organized. They have a structure. And the structure is hierarchical in the most literal and practical sense, not hierarchical in the way of importance, as in some needs matter and others do not, hierarchical in the way of sequence. Certain needs must be addressed before others can genuinely be pursued. And here is the cruelty of the modern moment. The culture we live in is entirely obsessed with the top of that structure, with meaning, with purpose, with peak experience, with full self-expression and achievement and the realization of potential. Every conversation about success, every book about personal growth, every podcast about becoming your best self is pointing toward the top, reaching for the highest levels of human experience. That is what we are being asked to want. But almost nobody is talking about the base. Think about the simplest metaphor for this, not a metaphor about pyramids or ladders or hierarchies. Just think about a building, any building. You do not start with the roof. You do not begin construction by designing the penthouse and hoping the structure below somehow handles itself. No architect in the history of construction has ever said we will figure out the foundation later, because they know with complete certainty that without a stable foundation, Nothing above it is safe. Nothing above it is permanent. And anything you build without that base will eventually collapse, no matter how beautiful it looks from outside. You are the building. Your security is part of the foundation, your physical stability, your sense of belonging somewhere, your sense that you are not constantly under threat. These are not bonus features. These are structural elements, and if they are not solid, nothing you build on top of them will hold. Not the confidence, not the productivity, not the sense of purpose, not the fulfillment, not the peace. None of it will hold without the base. And here is the thing about Maslow that gets lost in every shallow summary. He was not describing a simple checklist. He was not saying, complete level 1, move to level 2, congratulations, you are now a fully functional human. He was describing something far more dynamic, far more fragile, and far more relevant to the specific way modern life tends to break people. He was describing how easily the base can be destabilized by circumstances that look completely normal from the outside. So if you're hearing something in this that resonates, something that touches a part of your experience that you have not had good language for before, leave a comment here and tell me where you are watching from. Sometimes just knowing that other people across completely different places, different lives, different stories, are sitting with the same thing changes something. You are not the only one in this, not even close. Because here is where it gets larger than just one person. The model that is draining you is not an accident. It is not simply a misunderstanding that a few well-meaning but confused people passed on to you. It is a structural feature of the kind of society we built. And understanding this does not mean blaming the society and absolving yourself of everything. It means understanding the context you are actually operating inside, so that your efforts can be aimed correctly. Modern society is extraordinarily good at destabilizing the base while pointing you toward the top. Think about financial insecurity, not poverty in the extreme sense. The ordinary, widely shared, rarely spoken aloud insecurity of not knowing if the ground is solid. The adult reality of one unexpected expense away from a cascade. The background noise of uncertainty about whether the job will still be there, whether the rent is sustainable, whether there is enough buffer between you and real difficulty. This is not rare. This is the ambient condition of most adults in the developed world, and it sits exactly where Maslow would have predicted it sits, in the second level of need, in the zone of safety and stability, right where the foundation is supposed to be solid. Now layer on top of that the cultural pressure to be performing at the top, to be self-actualizing, to be passionate about your work, to be living with purpose, to be thriving, to be well, to be growing, to be reaching your potential. You have a person whose safety is genuinely uncertain, whose stability is quietly shaky, whose belonging is fragile, and you are telling that person that their problem is that they are not dreaming big enough, that they need to want it more, that they should journal about their 5-year vision while the foundation cracks beneath them. This is not individual failure. This is a collective misdiagnosis playing out at scale, across millions of people simultaneously, all of whom are being told the same wrong thing about the same real problem. And the result is not just personal frustration. The result is a specific kind of cultural exhaustion, the kind you can feel everywhere once you learn to recognize it. The exhaustion of people who are working very hard in the wrong direction, who are depleting themselves trying to reach a place the system was never actually going to let them reach, because the conditions required to get there were never actually provided. Maslow saw this coming, not in the specific technological and economic forms it has taken, because he could not have foreseen those, but in the pattern, in the fundamental incompatibility between a culture that dismisses the base and a species that is biologically structured to require the base before anything above it becomes accessible. He was not pessimistic about this, but he was clear. And clarity in this case is not comfortable. Here is the part where your emotional reaction might become resistance, because what you are about to hear contradicts something deep. It contradicts the story most of us were given about how effort and will and wanting things hard enough can overcome anything. You do not want to believe that circumstances matter as much as they do, because if circumstances matter, then some of what has gone wrong was not entirely in your control, and we live in a culture that is very uncomfortable with that idea. We want agency. We want the story where the individual, through sheer force of self, transcends their conditions, because that story is inspiring, and because the alternative feels like surrender. But listen carefully, because this is where the truth is more useful than the comfortable story. Recognizing that you have been trying to build at the wrong level is not surrender. It is precision. It is the difference between a doctor who correctly identifies where the problem is and a doctor who keeps treating the wrong organ, because the correct diagnosis is inconvenient. Maslow did not say that people are helpless. He said that people are hierarchical, that we are built in a specific order, and that respecting that order is not weakness. It is the only thing that actually works. When he studied the healthiest people he could find, the ones operating at what he called self-actualization, the ones who seemed genuinely whole and alive and creative and purposeful, he did not find people who had muscled their way past unmet needs through sheer willpower. He found people whose foundations were in some meaningful way solid, not perfect, not uncomplicated, but solid enough to support what was being built on top of them. And critically, he found that self-actualization was not a destination. It was not a state you arrive at and then stay in permanently. It was a direction, a process, something that requires ongoing conditions. And the most dangerous of those conditions, the one most easily disrupted, was the base. Now let us talk about what this actually means for you, for the texture of your daily experience, for the vague restlessness that sometimes wakes you up at 3 in the morning for no reason you can name. The tiredness you feel is real. The emptiness that sometimes appears in the middle of things that are supposed to feel good is real. The strange inability to feel fully present in your own life, even when nothing is overtly wrong, that is real too. These are not symptoms of weakness. They are not symptoms of ingratitude. They are not symptoms of a generation that wants too much or appreciates too little. They are precise, specific signals from a system that is working exactly as it should. The signal is this. Something beneath where you are trying to operate needs attention. And because modern life is designed to keep you looking upward, the signal gets misread. You see the tiredness and think you need more motivation. You feel the emptiness and think you need a better goal. You feel the inability to be present and think you need to meditate harder or be more disciplined about your phone usage, all of which might be true, but none of which addresses the structural reality underneath. Maslow described something he called a deficit need, a need that, when unmet, generates a pulling force, like gravity, but pointing inward and downward. The unmet need does not announce itself clearly. It does not send you a notification that says, by the way, your need for belonging is currently undersupported, and that is why you feel hollow, even when your productivity metrics are fine. It expresses itself indirectly, in the flatness of experience, in the effort required to care about things that should feel meaningful, in the subtle but persistent sense that something is not quite right, even when, by every external measure, things are objectively fine. And here is the part that is both the most disorienting and the most liberating thing about Maslow's actual work. The problem is almost never what it looks like from the surface. The restlessness in your relationships is rarely a relationship problem. The disconnection you feel from your work is rarely a career problem. The sense that you are not living the life you were supposed to be living is rarely a goals problem. These are the visible expressions of something happening at a different level, something earlier in the sequence, something that has been asking for attention for longer than you have been aware of. You do not like this idea, I understand that, not as a polite acknowledgement, but as an accurate observation about how the mind responds to this kind of information. You do not want the problem to be structural. You want it to be solvable with a specific action, because specific actions feel like control. If the problem is that you need a better morning routine, you can get a better morning routine. If the problem is that you need to read a specific book, you can read the book. If the problem is that you need to set clearer goals, you can set clearer goals. But if the problem is that your sense of safety has been quietly eroded by years of uncertainty, if the problem is that you have been belonging to groups and communities in a surface way, while your deeper need for real connection has gone unaddressed, if the problem is that your sense of who you are, your identity, your sense of being someone whose existence has inherent value, has been battered by a culture that assigns worth based on output and performance, well, those are harder. Those do not have a three-step solution. Those require something different. And the mind does not like what is harder. It prefers the illusion of control over the discomfort of accuracy. But the mind, as Maslow and everyone who has carefully studied human psychology will tell you, does not negotiate with reality. It can resist reality. It can avoid reality. It can explain reality away for a remarkably long time. But the unmet need does not disappear because you have convinced yourself it is not there. It continues generating its signal, quietly, persistently, in ways that will keep showing up in your experience regardless of how many productivity systems you adopt. This is what the hollow feeling is telling you. This is what the 3 a.m. restlessness is saying. This is what the strange sadness that appears for no apparent reason in the middle of an otherwise fine day is pointing toward. Not that you are broken, not that you are weak, not that you have failed to want things hard enough, but that something in the foundation needs to be seen. Let us expand this one more time. Because this is not just happening to you. Look at the world around you, not critically, not judgmentally, but observationally. Look at the epidemic of anxiety that is not about anything specific, but is simply ambient, present, background radiation in millions of lives simultaneously. Look at the epidemic of loneliness that exists in a world more technically connected than any previous civilization in human history. Look at the widespread feeling of purposelessness that exists despite more material abundance and more choice than any previous generation has ever had access to. These are not separate problems. They are not 3 different crises requiring 3 different solutions. They are 3 expressions of the same structural reality, a civilization that has collectively, systematically, consistently underinvested in the base while obsessively pursuing the top. Safety is precarious at scale. Belonging has been replaced by connection metrics. The deeper forms of identity and esteem that require real community, real recognition from people who actually know you, have been substituted by digital surrogates that activate the same neurological pathways with a fraction of the nutritional value. And into this environment, into this specific condition of collective base destabilization, we pour an endless stream of content about how to maximize your performance, unlock your potential, and become the best version of yourself. You cannot build the best version of yourself without a foundation. You cannot reach the top of a structure you are not actually standing on. And the relentless cultural pressure to focus on the top while the base erodes is not just unhelpful, it is actively damaging, because it keeps you looking in the wrong direction for the source of the pain. Maslow did not call himself a pessimist. He called himself a scientist of human potential. And what he saw across decades of careful observation was that human beings are capable of extraordinary things, that the ceiling of human experience is genuinely high, that people can reach levels of aliveness, of creativity, of connection, of meaning, that most people never catch a glimpse of in their entire lives. But he also saw that the path there is not upward through willpower. The path there is downward through honesty, through the willingness to look at what is actually being asked for, at the level where you actually are, through the courage to stop performing need fulfillment and start actually addressing it. The most honest thing Maslow left behind is not the pyramid that shows up in every management textbook and motivational poster. The pyramid became shorthand, a simplified diagram, something people nod at and move on from. The honest thing he left behind is something quieter. It is in the way he described what happens to a person who genuinely gets their base met, not as a destination, not as the finish line, but as a foundation. What happens to a person who genuinely has enough safety, enough belonging, enough esteem, is not that they suddenly have a clear 5-year plan. It is not that they become productive in the conventional sense. What happens is that they become more themselves, more curious, more willing to engage with the world, less defended, less reactive, less desperate in the way they pursue things. There is a relaxing into life that cannot be manufactured from the top down. It can only emerge from the bottom up. And this is the part that the culture of performance and optimization will never tell you, because it cannot monetize it, because it requires something that cannot be packaged and sold. It requires sitting honestly with what is actually missing. It requires a kind of attention to your own experience that is slow and quiet and deeply uncool in a world that rewards speed and noise. It requires asking a question that feels almost embarrassingly simple. What do I actually need right now? Not what should I want? Not what am I supposed to want at my age, at this stage of my life, given everything I have already done, and everything that is expected of me next. What do I actually need? And then it requires the even harder second step, letting the honest answer be what it is, even if it is inconvenient, even if it is not what you wanted the answer to be, even if it means acknowledging that some of what you have been striving toward has been striving in the wrong direction, and that the exhaustion you feel is not a sign that you need to push harder, but a sign that you have been pushing in a direction the foundation cannot currently support. This is the mechanism Maslow was pointing at when he said that what seems normal is not always what is natural. Normal is the ambient condition of the culture around you. Normal is what everyone is doing, what everyone is being told to do, what the visible world reinforces as correct. And normal in the current cultural moment is to be striving at the top while the base quietly erodes. Normal is to feel the symptoms of foundational instability and interpret them as motivational failure. Normal is to be tired in a way that sleep does not fix and to conclude that you are simply not trying hard enough. Natural is something older, something the nervous system knows before the culture gets its hands on it. Natural is the pull toward safety, toward genuine belonging, toward being truly seen and valued by the people around you. Natural is the organism's insistence that certain things must be in place before certain other things become possible. What seems normal is draining you, because normal has been constructed in ways that systematically ignore what is natural. And the distance between those two things is not just uncomfortable, it is expensive. It costs you your energy, it costs you your capacity for presence, it costs you years of effort aimed at a target you could not have hit regardless of how hard you aimed, because the target required conditions that the normal path was never going to provide. This does not mean nothing can be done. It means that what needs to be done is different from what you have been told. The starting point is not at the top. The starting point is wherever in the sequence something is genuinely unstable, and the work of finding that point is not the work of failure. It is the beginning of the only kind of progress that actually holds. There is a version of this moment of recognizing the gap between normal and natural, between the model you were given and the reality of how human beings actually work, where the emotion that arrives is grief, a quiet grief, not dramatic, not the kind that requires tissues and crisis lines, the kind that feels like something settling, like recognizing a weight you have been carrying for so long you forgot it was there. If that is what you are feeling right now, I want you to hear this clearly. That feeling is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something that was already wrong is being seen for the first time. And being seen is not the same as being permanent. Seeing clearly is where change actually begins. Not the change of gritting your teeth and pushing harder, the change of redirecting, of knowing for the first time with some accuracy where the actual work is. Not because a book said so, not because a theory told you to, but because when you look honestly at your own experience, you can feel it. The foundation, the thing that needed attention all along, the level where the real work lives. Abraham Maslow died in 1970 at the age of 62. He spent his final years working on ideas that went beyond the hierarchy that made him famous. He was increasingly interested in what he called the farther reaches of human nature, the outer edges of what people could become when their conditions were genuinely right. He was not a pessimist about any of this. He was, by every account, deeply convinced that human beings were capable of far more than the ordinary course of modern life allowed them to access. But he was also honest. He was honest about the conditions required. And he was honest about what happens when those conditions are not met, and people are told that the problem is inside them. The problem is not inside you. The problem is that you have been handed a map that was drawn incorrectly from the beginning, a map that starts at the destination and assumes the terrain is already navigated. And you have been walking that map faithfully, diligently, with real dedication, and wondering why you are not where the map said you would be. The terrain is real. The hierarchy is real. The base matters in ways that nothing above it can compensate for. And knowing this, truly knowing this, not just as an interesting intellectual piece of information, but as a navigational fact about your actual life, is the beginning of something different, not easier, not immediately more comfortable, not a quick fix of any kind, but more accurate, and accuracy in the end is the only thing that leads anywhere worth going. If something in this shifted the way you are reading your own experience, if there is a word for a feeling you have been carrying that did not have a name before this, if you are looking at the texture of your daily life with slightly different eyes than when you started listening, then take a moment and subscribe to this channel. Leave your like. This kind of content exists because people keep asking for it. Because somewhere in the flood of noise that tells you to optimize and grind and become more productive and want more and push harder, there is a need for something that asks different questions, slower questions, deeper ones. This is that place, and your support is what keeps it alive and able to reach the people who need it most. Thank you for being here, for listening to the end, for taking this seriously enough to stay with it. The foundation is not your weakness, it is where you start.